months out from New Zealand is heading to the polls, the Prime Minister said it's called a COVID Response and Recovery Fund, and that is what it's for. David Cormack, if you were to give the budget a figure out of 10, 10 being the highest, what would you give it?
Oh, 3.5 or 4.
Really?
I just felt it lacked imagination. I thought we have an opportunity to reset a lot of inequality problems, climate problems, but I just didn't feel like we went down the path that we could have. But in terms of keeping the money aside, it's kind of National's bad luck on that front. Like, I think it's the sensible thing for the government to do because the situation is continuously changing and we just don't know what it's going to look like in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So actually having money kept aside is, to me, a very sensible option, and I'm surprised National's criticising it. I mean, I get it just because they're sad because the government gets to chuck around $20 billion in the last 4 months before an election, but the country needs it.
Okay, Michelle Bogue, 3.5 to 4 out of 10 for the election, for the budget for David Cormack. What would you give it?
Well, probably not far away from David's assessment, but my problem is it's very easy to give away money, and I think a lot of the money that they are giving away is not well targeted. And that's partly because they just want to get it out there, but there's no underlying strategy or plan behind it.
What would you rather do?
And that's what worries me, yeah. And that's the same with, look, everyone would love to have $20 billion to throw around in 3 or 4 months, and everybody who has got an itch they want scratched will be coming to the government saying, I want some of that $20 billion.
Isn't that called planning? What happens if we have a second wave?
No, that's not planning. That's not planning, Wallace. Just waiting for people to say, I need some money, and then responding to that. We've seen a lot of that is not actually planning. You actually have to look at where the money is going and what good it's doing. And I think there hasn't been enough of that. I think it's been, if we throw money here and throw money there, then that will work because it puts money into circulation. But actually running an economy is harder than that. And in 6 months' time, we're going to see that. And the $20 billion will be spent around the next 3-4 months. And David? It won't be there when we need it in 6 months' time.
Your thoughts, David?
I mean, you do need a plan, but also this is something that's never happened before, so there's actually no playbook for us to fall back on. And so I think that they've made probably about as good a decisions as they could have, to be honest. And we're not actually going to know if they've done the right thing for 3 or 4 years when we've come out the other side of this, because it's going to get grim regardless of what they've done, right? There's nothing that can stave off what is coming.
All right, very good. David Cormack and Michelle Bogue. And the results are through. 60% of you would support the proposed cannabis legalisation and control bill. 60%. Thank you very much for your text. And Michelle, David, thank you very, very much for joining me this afternoon on Monday's panel. It's been great.
Thank you very much.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back. See ya. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint next. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Sound the bell. School is back and lesson number 1's in hand sanitizer and social distancing. So how many children turned up and who might stay away for good? Sticking with education, early childhood centres are encouraged to employ more qualified teachers with a budget boost. Air New Zealand runs out of runway over a massive flight refund stoush. We can shop en masse at the mall, but actual mass is off because of church crowd limits. But Cabinet's committed to reviewing the rules. And a warning to arsonists targeting cell phone towers. They're putting lives at risk by jeopardising emergency calls. And the Queensland Premier pops the bubble, the Trans-Tasman travel bubble.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. Some principals have reported low turnouts for the first full day of school in 8 weeks today. About 800,000 children had been expected to return to class for the first time since the lockdown began in March. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The Principals Federation, which represents primary and intermediate schools, says some have reported as few as 30% of their children attending today. It says the poor turnouts appear to be concentrated in lower decile schools. The Federation says the average attendance across about 350 schools that responded to an informal survey today was about 82%. The figure follows Education Ministry warnings that regular attendance could fall following the 8-week lockdown. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
A phone app to help people record where they've been will be released on Wednesday. The app is part of the ongoing management of the COVID-19 pandemic and helps quickly contact trace people who have been around someone who tests positive for the virus. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says what's best described as a digital diary won't be shared any further.
It is for you, it is on your device, and it is your data and your information. And I think that's just really responding to some of the concerns that I've heard or seen. Some people don't want to fill in a paper-based form that will sit in a public place.
Jacinda Ardern says, however, work is still being done on an app closer to what's being used in Australia that will track contacts through data sharing. An Air New Zealand customer says she's thrilled she can now get a refund for a flight that was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Until today, the airline wouldn't refund passengers who were set to transit through the United States between Auckland and London, while they sought clarification on US laws. Today, in the face of a complaint to the Commerce Commission, Air New Zealand changed its mind. The passenger says it's fantastic news.
Shame that it had to come to, going through Consumer NZ and the Commerce Commission. It's a pity about that. However, I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm delighted.
The woman says she spent $9,000 on the flights. A teachers' union has praised the government's decision to restore extra funding for early childhood services with 100% of qualified teachers. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says just under $300 million will go towards the extra funding, which is intended to encourage centres to employ registered and qualified teachers. The Educational Institute's early childhood spokesperson and kindergarten teacher, Virginia Oakley, says it shows they're valued.
We study really hard. We are part of the education sector. This acknowledges the importance of the learning that's going on for children, that the government recognise that they need the importance of qualified teachers, that teachers understand child development and how children learn.
Virginia Oakley. The new 100% funding rates will apply from 2021. A scientist who wrote a report for the Ministry of Health on 5G is rubbishing any claims it causes harm. Martin Gledhill, who's been working in the radiation field for 30 years, says there's no evidence of any harm to humans from cell phone towers. His comments follow more than a dozen suspicious fires at cell tower sites this year. He says there's nothing special about 5G and it's similar to 4G and even radio and TV waves. The Prime Minister says she's not concerned New Zealand's support for independent inquiry into the COVID-19 outbreak will damage the relationship with China. New Zealand is one of 62 countries backing a joint Australian and European Union push to be discussed overnight at the World Health Assembly. Jacinda Ardern was asked if she's worried about the effect this might have on the relationship, given China was the source of the first reported cases.
No, I mean, I've been through the statement again today, and actually the suggestion is that there will be widespread and potentially unanimous support for an independent inquiry, because this is one that does not seek to lay blame. It seeks to learn from an experience that I think every citizen around the world would know we would need to learn from.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. Queues at the public swimming pool have kept New Zealand's most successful Paralympian, Sophie Pascoe, waiting another day to get back in the water. Christchurch City Council reopened swimming pools today and the public has returned to the facilities in their droves. But Pascoe's coach, Rolly Crichton, says the 9-time Paralympic gold medalist gets no special treatment.
We normally just march straight in and get on with the job, where actually she'd just been and doing a gym session today at High Performance and come past and the queue was huge getting into the swimming pool, so we're letting Joe Blogs get their fix out of the way.
Rolly Crichton. Former All Black Aaron Cruden's return to the Chiefs will be a brief one. Super Rugby sides return to training today, with Cruden confirming he is heading back overseas at the end of the 10-week Super Rugby Aotearoa competition, which kicks off next month. Cruden only returned to the Chiefs this season after an injury-plagued couple of years in France. He won't reveal where he's heading to just yet.
It's more just the club want to be the ones to announce something, so it's not really on my terms, and obviously happy for them to be able to do that and when they say so. But at this stage, it will be looking to sort of head offshore again.
Aaron Cruden. That's the news.
Children head back to school.
Whilst we've done a lot of work to support learning from home, it's going to be better for all of them if they're back at school and able to really resume their learning at full pace.
As the lockdown ends,
the kids all seem really happy, but to be honest, they're not leaping about or running after friends and so forth. It does seem like everyone's just taking it in their stride, to be honest.
But what about the return to assessments?
You only have to catch up if somebody's made some line in the sand that you've got to get to. The reality is that we'll take it one step at a time.
Catch up on your news with Morning Reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening. Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Canterbury. Cloud with a few showers spreading north tonight, becoming fine in the south tomorrow morning and further north tomorrow afternoon. For the remaining regions of the North and South Island, mainly fine apart from areas of low cloud or fog morning and night, and the chance of a shower for eastern Northland and Great Barrier Island. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and occasional showers, mainly tomorrow morning, when some could be heavy. You're listening to RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Hundreds of thousands of children returned to very different classrooms and early learning settings today after an historic 8-week break due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But things were a lot different. There was hand sanitizer at school gates, desks were spaced apart, social distancing in the playground, and carefully developed hygiene plans were put to the test. But not everyone came back. This afternoon, the Education Minister admitted early numbers showed at least 20% of school children had stayed away, and most early childhood centres were half empty. Logan Church reports.
It was smiles all around today at Te Aro Primary School in Wellington as this class of Year 3s and 4s reunited.
It's been good, really good. Probably my favourite thing so far, that's not like break, is probably what we're doing right now, like PE, like dodgeball and stuff, which is pretty cool. It's been really good to be back at school.
Well, it's a bit weird and a bit scary, but it's pretty cool that I get to see my friends again. And it's a bit weird, and I felt a bit weird going back into the class because I was like, I hadn't seen everyone for so long. Really great. I like to see my friends and my teachers.
Have you missed your friends and teachers?
Yeah, I have a lot.
But it's not school as they know it, as Principal Sue Clement explains.
So we were here bright and early, having set up over the weekend and at the end of last week. And two of us were down at the bottom of the drive meeting and greeting everybody. And there were other members of staff at the different other entrances to greet. Those parents who stepped onto the school property had to sign in so that we could contact trace. Otherwise, they left their darlings at the gates, and the children came up the drive or across the playground into school. And we'd asked families today to arrive at around 8:30 and not earlier, just so that we knew that we had everything in place.
Hand washing and sanitation are now regularly worked into the day. The class behind us are playing with dodgeballs in their first PE lesson in weeks. They have to use hand sanitizer before and afterwards. The sports equipment is also regularly cleaned. Today, these students have been figuring out all of the new rules that have been put in place.
Actually, now there's 3 breaks instead of 2, and we actually have to keep our distance as well.
Our parents aren't even allowed to walk up the hill. We have to go down the hill by ourselves. But some parents can, like the little kids. We have to stay at our own table, but we can move to a different table. When you go inside a classroom, you have to use hand sanitizer. And you wash your hands a lot.
and there is like free breaks times. I really like that new rule.
There have also been changes inside the school's 9 classrooms.
We've also divided up the classes so they're in fact been, instead of a really long hour lunchtime, we've had 2 30-minute breaks and a 20-minute break during the day, and we've staggered the classes in 2 groups, so we've had some going out at one time and then the second morning tea following that, and the same at lunchtime, just to kind of break up the play spaces and not have too much congestion.
And how have the kids responded to that?
Most of them have been quite happy, although I do know there's a couple who feel a bit aggrieved that their friends are in other classes and they weren't having break time with them.
The school's roll usually sits at 240, but Sue Clements says 20% of their students have stayed home today.
We've contacted all our families and asked them to just let us know exactly where they were at, and that we'll retouch base with them again at the end of this week to find out their plans for next week,
And Te Aro Primary School isn't alone. Education Minister Chris Hipkins said school attendance numbers were being monitored, but only 1,200 schools and early childhood centres had so far taken part on what was a busy first morning.
As at 10:30am this morning, we had 209,759 students reported via their daily attendance survey as attending school. That's an average attendance rate across the schools that completed the survey of 80%. For early learning services, we had 36,780 children reported as attending an early learning service. That averages out across the early learning services that completed the survey at 53%.
At Auckland's Freeman Bay School, students were let out in 3 phases. At 2:45, then 3 o'clock, the last kids leaving the school gates at 3:30. Parents said having the day off had been a bit of a relief.
I mean, I haven't had a problem with it actually. They've been great at home too. So, yeah. But good change. Change is good.
It's all contact tracing. You have to put your name and numbers, and then you have to sign out, sign in, so both things. So it's properly done, and the children have been spaced separately. Our teacher have put the marking, so it's all what we are doing as per level 2.
Spending near 2 months with kids at home, yes. Kids are easily bored, and yes. So now, yes, take some space for me and for them.
I found it a little bit chaotic today, but I hope tomorrow it will be better, because yesterday my husband was the one who read the email about the process, and I didn't know that I will be the one to pick up my kid today, so I wasn't so this is a bit surprising.
And kids were also loving being back in the classroom.
I went out and I raced on bikes, and it was really fun.
I'm very happy.
What was the best bit about being back?
I can see my friend and my sisters and my teacher.
There was a lot of hand sanitizer that we had to use and a lot of washing hands.
The most exciting thing about school was, well, I got to see my friends in person instead of talking to them on the phone and on Teams and all of that.
This afternoon, the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, wanted to reassure any parents that might be nervous sending their kids back to school.
Well, I hope that they will be reassured as well over coming days that the risk is very, very low, if they're at all, and that schools have done an enormous amount to ensure that they are keeping students and staff safe in the school environment.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Meanwhile, the government has restored a top pay band for fully trained early childhood teachers, committing $278 million over the next 4 years. The 100% funding band for teacher-led ECE services was scrapped by the previous national government in 2010. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says restoring this top band should encourage more centres to use fully trained teachers and keep them there.
It comes at a time when COVID-19 is likely to lower demand for early learning, as the Prime Minister has mentioned, and this funding will help them to keep hold of their qualified and registered staff. We did have a shortage of early childhood teachers going into the COVID-19 response, and we don't want to lose any registered teachers we have while we experience a dip in participation.
He says early education plays a huge role in a child's development.
Those kids who participate in quality early childhood education do better in schooling and they do better later in life. We've had a number of longitudinal studies in New Zealand that really highlights that if we get it right in ECE, it has huge flow-on benefits.
That was the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins. So what does the funding boost mean for kindergartens and those who work there? The CEO of He Whānau Manaaki Kindergarten Association in Wellington is Mandy Coulson, and she joins me now. Mandy, you've got more than 100 kindergartens, so is this cause for celebration for you?
Huge cause for celebration, Lisa. It's an amazing announcement. But it's not just amazing for kindergarten, it's amazing for every centre that has worked blood, sweat and tears to ensure that they have 100% qualified registered teachers. It's not just a kindergarten thing. But, I'll take it for kindergarten. We're really, really, really happy.
So what difference will it mean for you guys in practical terms? Like, how many fully qualified teachers do you employ now? What difference will it make to get this extra funding?
Well, for the last 10 years, we've employed 100% qualified registered teachers while being funded for 80%. So that equates to around, when the government cut funding back in 2010, that equated to around $5 million a year that we've had to manoeuvre and work incredibly hard to offset to ensure that we keep our 100% qualified teachers. So this is significant stuff for us in terms of just being able to have the money to really invest in our children.
So how much of a scramble do you reckon there will be for teachers? Because we've always been told there's a shortage. Are there enough to go around?
There are enough to go around, and I'm old enough to remember when the previous Labor-led government had a target of 100% qualified teachers. And there was a huge amount of activity. Teachers' colleges, universities were recruiting students. Everybody was clamouring to get qualified teachers. And that's what will happen next. I think, we must aspire to having 100% of our teacher-led early learning services employing 100% qualified registered teachers. It's the only way that we can really honour our youngest children.
So what's going to happen to those workers who may be in positions at the moment, they don't have these qualifications? Does it mean some people are going to lose their jobs?
No, what it is, it's an incentive, and services can start working towards us. And the thing is that people can go into training, and that's what I mean. People started to train. People started to get qualifications. If you're a great unqualified person that works with children, you'll be an even greater qualified teacher. And that's what people have to get their heads around. In the school sector, that if you send your child anywhere in the country to any primary or secondary school, they are going to have a qualified registered teacher working with them. That can't be assured in early childhood education, and that needs to change.
So the Minister today, when he made this announcement, he said part of the timing is also good because they anticipate COVID-19 is going to have an effect on demand for early childhood services. What impact do you think it is going to have, COVID-19?
I think that what this will do is give flexibility to services to be able to really respond to local community need. And qualified registered teachers are professionals that are able to work with children and with communities to engage them. Today, we had our 102 kindergartens with around 5,000 children attending. And lots of our teachers were worried and anxious, just as the children and parents in whānau were. But when they got together in those relationships and just focusing on learning and having great experiences, that's what really counted. And
what percentage of... Sorry, Mandy, to interrupt. What percentage of your normal kids was that? So if you had about 5,000 there, what was that as a percentage of...
About 80%.
And do you know much about where the other 20% were and why maybe they didn't come?
I think that there was a whole lot of scaremongering that happened during level 3, which has made parents and whānau quite worried. And what will happen, just as we had 63 of our kindergartens open during level 3, is that over time, as the days went by, more and more children engaged. And so it's really important that parents and whānau feel comfortable about their children engaging. And so, if they want to wait a week, 2 weeks, whatever, that's what's really important. What's really important is that people feel okay about starting back in early childhood and at school. And so as time goes by, people will just start to feel more comfortable. And for those that don't, we'll provide distance learning.
So are you still doing that with Little E's, distance learning?
Yeah. Yes. It's again, it's really important that children are connected and engaged, and that they can see outside of their home, as well as making the most of the learning experiences inside their home. So, we were really determined to provide services that keep children connected. And as time's gone by, some have come back, lots and lots of children have, and some haven't, but we'll still keep connected with them through distance learning.
Thanks for your time this evening. That's Mandy Coulson, who's the CEO of He Whānau Manaaki Kindergarten Association in Wellington. It is 22 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Did your children go back to school today? How did it all work for you? If you kept them home, let us know why. New Zealand is being urged to tread carefully as it backs an international inquiry into the COVID-19 outbreak. The World Health Assembly is meeting virtually tonight to discuss the next steps in tackling the pandemic, and all members are expected to unanimously endorse an independent review of the international health response. Australia and the European Union have been pushing for the inquiry, a move that's seen trade tensions between Australia and China rise. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the investigation is about looking at what happened and what lessons can be learned, not finger-pointing. But the opposition says this is a delicate balance that the government will need to manage. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Jacinda Ardern says what New Zealand is backing is an independent look at what the world can learn from the COVID-19 outbreak.
And that includes from different countries' responses as it entered within their borders as well. Because I think it's natural that after such an insignificant event, we would want to take a look at what we should all have learnt from this experience.
She says she's confident that won't damage relations with China.
Because this is one that does not seek to lay blame. It seeks to learn from an experience that I think every citizen around the world would know we would need to learn from.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says this is standard practice following an event like the COVID-19 outbreak, and he says he wouldn't characterise it as an investigation.
It's a review, and it's being agreed by the governing body, which is all member states of WHO. So, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of negotiation about what the scope and nature of such a review will be, but the intent is very clear and shared by member states, that it is to find out what we can learn to inform what we do next.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says the vast majority of countries are not politicising the pandemic, but are working collaboratively. But Australia's calls to investigate the origins of the deadly virus has seen tensions between Australia and China rise. China has threatened crippling tariffs on Australian barley and suspended some imports of red meat. And New Zealand received a strong rebuke from China last week over its backing of Taiwan being allowed to be an observer at the World Health Assembly. National's Foreign Affairs spokesperson Jerry Brownlee says while he supports an investigation to learn lessons, it will be a delicate balance ensuring such an investigation does not turn into a witch hunt.
What I worry about is some kind of Trump-like escalation of tension is unnecessary in an environment where all anybody wants to know is how do we prevent this happening again?
He says the government should tread respectfully with our major trading partner, and he's concerned that the tone struck by Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters, including telling the Chinese ambassador to listen to her master earlier this month, hasn't been respectful.
At a time like this where the whole world is grappling with a problem, the sort of normal diplomatic respect that's shown should be far more to the fore. In the case of Winston Peters, he's simply looking to grab his 5% so he survives in the coming election.
But trade expert Charles Finney says he doesn't think China will be upset by the review or New Zealand's support of it.
It doesn't seem to be the type of investigation that maybe one large player has been suggesting. This is something that's far more sort of moderate in its approach.
He doesn't expect to see any retaliation, saying that Australia and China's relationship is far more complex than ours.
And we should not be assuming that just because there might be something happening in Australia-China trade relations, that it would happen automatically to New Zealand. The other point I'd make is that overnight, China seems to be offering a bit of an olive branch to Australia in some of its public comments. So things may not be as bad as some are interpreting.
Mr Finney says New Zealand has been consistent in its stance on Taiwan, and he thinks Ms Ardern struck the right note with her comments today. He says he would be very surprised if China was in any way disconcerted by New Zealand's position. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Air New Zealand has had a change of heart on refunding passengers who would have transited through the United States in the face of a complaint to the Commerce Commission. People who would have travelled the route between Auckland and London via the United States will, as of today, be able to claim a full refund from the airline. It comes as Consumer New Zealand made an official complaint to the Commission, saying Air New Zealand was misleading its customers. Ben Strang has more.
Yesterday, if you sought a refund from a cancelled Air New Zealand flight between Auckland and London, the airline would have sent you packing. But as of this afternoon, Air New Zealand has had a change of heart and says refunds will be available on request. In a statement, the airline says it's seeking clarity from the United States Department of Transportation, whose laws state passengers arriving, departing or transiting through the country are eligible for a full refund if their flight is cancelled under any circumstances. For one passenger who was booked on the route in June, she says she's thrilled that the $9,000 she forked out for flights will be refunded.
It's marvellous. It's absolutely fantastic news. Shame that it had to come to, going through Consumer NZ and the Commerce Commission. It's a pity about that. However, I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm delighted.
In a statement sent out at midday, a few hours after Consumer New Zealand had filed a complaint with the Commerce Commission, Air New Zealand announced its change of tack. It declined to be interviewed, but in the statement said it had been providing refunds to customers with cancelled flights to and from the United States, including Hawaii. That included the majority of flights which were transiting through the United States, with the exception of the NZ1 and NZ2 services between Auckland and London. The airline said it still hasn't received clarification on the rules from the US Department of Transport, but will start offering refunds on those flights as well when a customer requests it. John Duffy, the Chief Executive of Consumer New Zealand, says that's good news.
We're pleased on behalf of those consumers who were up till now missing out on refunds that they were entitled to. So, it's pleasing to see Air New Zealand do the right thing by these consumers.
Despite the positive move, John Duffy says it's a shame it had to come to this.
Especially when we're talking about our national carrier, we think that they should do the right thing by consumers, and that's not necessarily just these flights. We think refunds should be on the table for all flights where the flight has been cancelled, because it's not the fault of the consumer, but due to some of the fare classes that are on offer, some of those flights, particularly for domestic travel, still won't be refundable.
The Commerce Commission have received the complaint from Consumer New Zealand and said they're prioritising all complaints related to COVID-19, including travel refunds. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, arsonists targeting cell towers are jeopardising the 111 system and lives along with it. Forget a winter getaway on the Sunshine Coast anytime soon. The Queensland Premier has burst the prospect of a trans-Tasman bubble. Super Rugby's return, but not as we know it. The Hurricanes and the Chiefs went back to training today. And while we were all locked down, New Zealand's population quietly passed the 5 million mark. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. We'd love to hear from you about the return to school or about Air New Zealand if you're waiting on a refund. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna with the headlines.
Some principals have reported low turnouts for the first full day of school in 8 weeks today. About 800,000 children had been expected to return to class for the first time since the lockdown began in March. The Principals Federation says while the average attendance was about 82%, some schools reported as few as a third of the roll turning up. It says the poor turnouts appear to be concentrated in low decile schools. A phone app to help people record where they've been will soon be released. The app is part of the ongoing management of the COVID-19 pandemic and helps quickly contact trace people who've been around someone who tests positive for the virus. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says what's best described as a digital diary won't be shared any further. An Air New Zealand customer says she's thrilled she can now get a refund for a flight that was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Until today, the airline would not refund passengers who were set to transit through the United States between Auckland and London while they sought clarification on US laws. In the face of a complaint to the Commerce Commission, Air New Zealand has now backed down. A scientist who wrote a report for the Ministry of Health on 5G is rubbishing any claims it causes harm. Martin Gledhill, who's been working in the radiation field for 30 years, says there's no evidence of any harm to humans from cell phone towers. His comments follow more than a dozen suspicious fires at cell tower sites this year. The government's been praised for restoring extra funding for early childhood services with 100% of qualified teachers. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says almost $300 million will go towards the extra funding, intended to encourage centres to employ registered and qualified teachers. Mandy Clouston from He Whānau Manaaki Kindergarten Association in Wellington has told Checkpoint it's a huge cause for celebration in a field where every learning centre has spent blood, sweat and tears to have only qualified staff. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to the business news now with Giles Beckford. Good evening, Giles. So, Smith City is saying it could be sold as soon as the end of the week. But is this a COVID thing or is it something else?
Well, it's a company that's really been going through the trials and tribulations of trying to find a presence and a new basis for its business for some time now. In 2015 or so, it started a rapid expansion, looking to broaden its appeal from its South Island base. It bought into the North Island. It expanded into Auckland, although it didn't quite get the right mix of business there or the right site, and it found itself having to restructure. It also found itself caught with underpaying its staff, who were required to attend meetings each day, but they weren't paid for them, and that resulted in an employment court ruling, which the company was pleased to accept, but it cost them another $1 million or so. It's been looking for some way to have sufficient capital to expand, to get sufficient bulk and volume in its sales. But I suspect that, like quite a few companies out there, the pandemic was really the one that's the straw that's broken the camel back. And from this point of view, it was struggling to find new capital. It got an extension on its financing from its bank. It was then looking, and it warned just a week ago that it really needed more capital in that business. It was looking and warning of shop closures, job losses. It's found its new source of capital, which is in fact a new owner, but that is subject to the new owner finding sufficient funds to go through with the deal. It's valued at $60 million, but into the bargain it means that Smith City will close probably 7 shops, with the probable loss of around 100 jobs. That's about a quarter of its workforce. Now, the company says that in the end, this was the only way to ensure that it had a long-term future. As a result of this, Smith City shareholders are likely to find themselves with really no value in their shares at all. The company may end up with around $8 million after the deal. The buyer is a private equity company, an investment concern called Polar Capital, and that was founded by Colin Neal. He was the founder and owner of Big Chill. Now, that's the big fleet of trucks that you'll see around the country taking refrigerated and frozen goods from meatworks and into supermarkets and the like. That was sold last year for more than $100 million. So the capital from that sale, who knows whether the funds will be reinvested into the Smith City deal, but the company is struggling. I suspect there are a lot of other retailers, not on Smith City's scale, but in their same predicament, and we may have more stories like this in the future.
Also, the service industry, it's all but ground to a halt in April. What do the numbers tell us?
Well, Smith City, of course, is just emblematic of the problems that hit the retail sector, and the retail sector makes up so much of the services sector, along with travel. No surprise then that come the lockdown last month, that everything should fall off the cliff. The reading for this index, which is compiled by Business New Zealand and the BNZ, is the lowest on record. So that's the lowest in about 13, 14 years. Allied that with the manufacturing survey that was out on Friday, it tells you an economy that basically hit the wall in that lockdown in some key sectors. It will be no surprise, and it's further tangible proof that the growth rate will in fact be negative growth. There'll be a contraction in the economy for April, May, into June. It will take quite some time for the economy to recover out of this. In key sectors, services making up 2/3 of our gross domestic product, the value of the economy.
Joel, shall we take a quick gallop around the markets before you head off?
Oh, let's have a canter, why don't we? A modest rise for our share market today, up 27 points, about 0.25%, 10,758. And the Kiwi dollar, 59.5 US cents, 92.4 Australian, and just a smidgen over 49 British pence.
Thank you, Giles. That is our business editor, Giles Beckford. As the country threw itself into lockdown in the fight against COVID-19, its population quietly passed 5 million people. Figures released by Stats New Zealand today show New Zealand's population passed the milestone in March. It's the fastest million in history, taking just 17 years to grow from a population of 4 million people in 2003. Annika Smith reports.
New Zealand was always on track to hit 5 million people this year. It was only a matter of when. The when turned out to be the end of March, as the country went into lockdown to prevent the spread of COVID-19 as it ravaged other countries. Stats NZ senior demographer Kim Dunstan says it was actually the pandemic that sped up New Zealand's population growth. Migration patterns changed as visitors were reclassified as migrants and New Zealanders living overseas returned home.
The global pandemic has definitely caused some unusual and unprecedented travel patterns. Visitors in the country, some of them have prolonged their stay and therefore are being classified now as migrants. But there's also this impact on New Zealand citizens in terms of more New Zealand citizens returning after living overseas and fewer New Zealand citizens departing.
Data from Stats NZ shows the New Zealand population is now more diverse and mature than ever before. 27% of our current population was born overseas, compared to 20% when the population stood at 4 million. There are also more people aged 65 and over and people of Māori ethnicity. In fact, Mr Dunstan says there have been significant changes to the country's overall ethnic composition.
We've also seen increasing numbers and proportions of our population identify with other ethnicities, such as different Pacific ethnicities, different Asian ethnicities, and ethnicities from Middle Eastern, Latin American and African ethnic groups.
More than 1 million people born overseas now live in New Zealand, while hundreds of thousands of New Zealand-born people live overseas, especially in Australia. Indian Workers Association spokesperson Mandeep Bella says the country's diversity is a strength to be celebrated.
Everybody adds something to this country, from whether it's through the culture, whether it's through their work. So that's something which brings us together, and that's what makes us human.
Kim Dunstan says while it's not clear exactly who the 5 millionth person is, he's narrowed it down to 2 options.
Given recent migration figures, it's likely that the 5 million was reached by a new migrant arriving by plane, but it's also possible that could have been one of our 60,000 new babies that we have each year.
Auckland woman Sam Morris had her first child, Octavia, on the 16th of March. Her little girl will always be special to her, but she may well be the country's special 5 millionth person.
She was 4 days late, so maybe that's what she was waiting for. It's grueling, you know, the anticipation as well. You're just waiting to meet this amazing little human. And, you know, every kind of hour more, a day more that you have to wait, it feels like an eternity.
As of this afternoon, the population stands at 5,05,392 people. New Zealand now sits alongside other countries, Costa Rica, Denmark, Finland and Singapore to name a few, in the 5 million club. I tāmaki makoto, mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
There have been more suspicious fires over the weekend at cell tower sites, with more than a dozen hit in a matter of weeks. The telecommunications sector is warning the suspected arsonists are putting lives at risk, as outages can cause problems calling emergency services. On top of that, repairing the damage costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jordan Bond reports.
A fictional conspiracy now having real-world effects. 17 cell phone towers damaged and some completely wrecked. 2 sites visited today were surrounded by fences and barbed wire, but that didn't help. The burnt-out boxes on the inside are badly damaged and out of order. Just around the corner from one of last week's fires in Mangere in South Auckland. The public didn't mince their words.
Pretty stupid then, eh?
Yeah. Well,
I just laughed initially. Man, we've got other problems too, you know. It is ridiculous, especially when it comes to what's happening now.
Last month, the Ministry of Health published a report on exposure levels near 5G cell towers. RNZ asked Martin Gledhill, the report's author who's been working in the radiation field for 30 years, whether there's a shred of evidence that 5G causes problems for humans.
The simple answer is no. And the sorts of radio waves they put out are little different to what we have from the existing 4G systems.
He says there's nothing special about 5G or anything fundamentally different from other radio waves, including radio and TV.
There's nothing to suggest that the way you encode the information onto the radio signal, so for example, how you actually transmit your TV program or how you transmit your data or your voice on a cell phone signal makes any difference to the way it interacts with the body.
5G towers have been vandalised around the world, with reports appearing to have increased in the last few months. The World Health Organization says there's a lot of research and one clear answer. There's no evidence linking exposure to wireless technology with illness. The fears aren't new, though. The WHO wrote an explainer in 2006 saying it didn't cause health issues. In fact, the body absorbs a lot more radiation from radio and TV signals, something we've had for a long time without issue. The Police Commissioner Andrew Costa is clear. They're after the perpetrators.
Obviously, we will investigate very thoroughly when this is going on, and we suspect that there's potential some of these events are linked. This is critical infrastructure, and it's reckless, to say the least, to try and damage it in this way, so we will be dealing with it very firmly when we identify those responsible.
Mr Gledhill says people shouldn't believe everything they read on Facebook.
It isn't actually backed up by the science. People should take perhaps a more critical approach to the way they view this kind of information rather than taking it all at face value.
The telcos are considering extra security around cell sites, and the police have already arrested a man in their ongoing investigations. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, aho.
It's 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A lot of you getting in touch about Air New Zealand and whether you're getting fair refunds for cancelled flights. This person says, Russell, actually. Tell a lie. Brad Mercer from Russell says Air New Zealand has gone from national treasure to national disgrace. And what about the poor people whose flights don't go through the US? Sarah has the same concerns, says, hi, can you please tell us about London flights via Singapore on Air New Zealand? Well, the deal at the moment is that the flights through America, either transit or stopping in America, are covered by American aviation laws, which require the customer to be offered a refund. So that is why Air New Zealand is offering refunds. So your flight would need to go through America, either transit or stopping over. Other ones are still being offered credits at this stage, it appears. Someone else says Air New Zealand's change of heart in paying refunds of flights cancelled to and from the US might have avoided a costly class action suit in the US court, likely more costly than the ticket refunds themselves. And someone else says, congrats, Consumer New Zealand. Forcing Air New Zealand to refund instead of credit will bring about their demise sooner. Taxpayers, again, will be forced to pay for a huge bailout. And Alan's got in touch to say it's appropriate that Air New Zealand has changed its position on refunds, but it should not be so cowardly as to refuse being interviewed. Indeed, it should go further to apologise to the public, its primary shareholders, for being so tight-fisted, especially given the size of the subsidy it's just received from the public. Keep your feedback coming in. Text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The government signalled it will reconsider rules that cap the number of people at religious services at 10, while by comparison, hundreds of more shoppers are free to arguably worship at the altar of consumerism. The Catholic Church is holding online services because the limit of 10 people at a service is not really workable. But Mass has been off altogether for 8 weeks and might not completely return to normal until there is a coronavirus vaccine. Last week, the government pulled a U-turn on funeral numbers, raising the limit from a maximum of 10 guests to 50. The Catholic Archbishop of Wellington, Cardinal John Dew, is hopeful rules will change so people can get back to church sooner rather than later.
While it's hard for people, it's hard for all of us, we've been disappointed, we're prepared to go along with that in order to keep people safe, in the hope that it will change fairly soon. And in actual fact, just this afternoon at 1 o'clock, Dr. Bloomfield announced that the size of faith-based communities gatherings is one of the specific issues that will be recognised by Cabinet next Monday. So we don't know what that will mean, but we know that they are thinking seriously about it. And in actual fact, he gave thanks for the churches and other faith-based organisations for what he said, their fantastic support. So we're hoping that it will change.
I understand that you want to follow the rules and keep everybody safe, but do you see any discrepancies here? I mean, malls have tens of people, if not hundreds of people in them, and you can have a funeral with 50 people, but you can't have a simple church service.
We did say that we were disappointed and asked why. We're not completely happy with it, but the reasons that were given initially were just to keep people safe. And in actual fact, the whole venture, I suppose, of preparing our churches for just 100 people, like marking out the spaces, making sure that people get in safely and come out safely without close contact, registering them, tracking and tracing them, is quite a big effort. And I know some parishes who ask people to help, and people said, well, look, we're not prepared at this stage. If there's any danger, we're not prepared to do that. We'll just wait until the numbers go up and it's safer. So it could be quite a challenge for us where you were to use the space that we have in some places just to mark it all out, use every second pew, enough to get 100 people in there. And probably some churches wouldn't even take 100.
But that would be your choice at that point. At the moment, you don't have a choice. You're restricted by the rules. Does it bother you at all that malls with hundreds of people in them can operate, yet a church service is off the agenda if there are more than 10 people?
Well, we have said that. We said in a letter last week that it didn't seem to be consistent, and we were hoping for a change, and that is what we continue to hope for, as long as people can be safe.
So what are some of your priests telling you about regular mass goers? How are they managing?
Most of them, and by far, the priests are saying that people are happy. There's a few people who are not, and who are emailing and saying, we want the churches open to get back to Mass as soon as possible. But it's a small minority. We are listening to them, and I've responded to lots of people and just trying to explain the very things that I've been saying to you. But it is a small minority. Most people have actually appreciated the online masses and also appreciated the opportunity themselves on a Sunday to do something a little different, to pray a little differently as a family. And we've encouraged people to do that because Catholics have an obligation to attend Mass on Sunday. But we've also been saying, well, while we're dispensing, we can do that under church law, we still want you to do something to acknowledge that Sunday is a special day. So many people have taken the scripture readings of the day and reflected on them as a family or as a group, which I think is a great thing because it's making an impact on people's lives, just thinking a little differently and thinking outside the square.
Do you think COVID-19 will have changed the church for good? I'm wondering what will happen with communion, sharing wine and bread.
Well, when the virus first started to be felt in this part of the world, we put practices in place saying that there would be, in the meantime, there would be no sharing of the chalice with the consecrated blood, the precious blood. There would be no sharing, and also, people have the option of receiving communion in their hand or on their tongue. We said no communion on the tongue because quite often the priest or the minister of the Eucharist putting the host on someone's tongue, it can easily touch their tongue. And most people have accepted that. And that may change, even though some people still don't like receiving in the hand. The majority do by far. Some people don't like that. That may change in order to keep people safe. And generally people have responded to that appeal to make sure that everything that is being done is to keep people safe.
Do you think that may change for good, though? Or until there is a vaccine, that these...
Well, it could until there's a vaccine. It's hard to know. There have been so many issues facing society and facing the church. We don't know just what's going to happen in the future. But because, and we did it once before when there was the threat of the bird flu some years ago, we asked people not to receive communion on the tongue, not to shake hands as a sign of peace, and people accepted that.
But you can go to a restaurant, sorry to interrupt, Cardinal John, but you can go to a restaurant and share food from plates. You can go to a restaurant and share wine or any other kind of drink at close quarters. Why is the church different and being treated differently?
The Prime Minister is saying that you can only do that in groups of 10. And they're prepared, she's saying, from what I understand, that usually it's a group of people who have close contact. But you could have 300 or 400 people at a Mass. And that's slightly different, because while we know that we have to track and trace, there's not that same social contact in that situation. So, but that has been our request for the government to think about that. And from what Dr. Bloomfield said today, I think that they probably are thinking about that when he says, at a public conference that they're going to reconsidering the specific issue of churches.
And that's the Catholic Archbishop of Wellington, Cardinal John Dew. Health ministers from around the world, including Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, are meeting online later tonight for the WHO's annual World Health Assembly. Representatives from all 194 member states meet every year to decide on global health priorities. The COVID-19 pandemic will, of course, be top of the agenda this year, and there's plenty to get through. Jacinda Ardern has confirmed the government is backing an Australian push for an investigation into the COVID outbreak in Wuhan in China. Australia and the European Union have both been calling for an independent investigation, a call China has condemned. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand also supports Taiwan achieving observer status at the WHO, another meaty issue ministers will chew over, and another thing China isn't happy about. With more on what can be expected from the virtual gathering, here's the BBC's Tulip Manzumda.
The World Health Organization is facing immense pressure over its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the US president leading the charge against the United Nations Health Agency. The US is the WHO's biggest single donor, but last month President Trump withdrew funding and launched a blistering attack on both the WHO and China.
Had the WHO done its job to get medical experts into China to objectively assess the situation on the ground and to call out China's lack of transparency, the outbreak could have been contained at its source with very little death.
The WHO did get teams into China to work alongside Chinese officials in January and February, and says since it was first alerted to the outbreak, China has shared crucial information which has helped other countries prepare. Founded in 1948, the World Health Organization's goal, both then and now, is ensuring the highest attainable level of health for all people. It works on a wide range of life-saving programs, from mass vaccination campaigns to sounding the alarm when international health emergencies hit. But it is just an advisory body. It doesn't have the power to enforce or compel countries to share information. Now, at this year's World Health Assembly, there are calls to give the agency more powers, with WHO inspectors able to go into countries at the start of outbreaks and carry out independent investigations.
The big challenge with outbreaks is that no country wants to have one. Every country wants to deny it's there, and every country wants to play down deaths. Right now, countries are required to notify if there's some kind of emerging pathogen within their countries. They're supposed to notify WHO within 24 hours to this. And so this would be an extension of that, to actually have WHO send an international mission in to investigate the origins of this.
Representatives from 194 countries who are meeting virtually this year will also consider calls from the EU, the UK, Australia, New Zealand and others for an international review of the global response to the pandemic. Another thorny issue at the meeting is likely to be around Taiwan, which has been praised for a very successful response to the pandemic, but is banned from attending because China and the UN doesn't recognise it as an independent state. There will also be renewed calls for equal access to vaccines against COVID-19 once they are developed for all nations, rich and poor.
The BBC's Tulip Mazumda with that report. Italy is gearing up to fling the gates open to the crucial tourist dollar once more. It's been one of the hardest hit countries, with 225,000 cases and nearly 32,000 deaths. The government has announced it will allow travel to and from the country starting from next month. That's been met with relief by tourist towns, desperate to revive their faltering economies. Here's Deutsche Welle's Jared Reid.
Famous for once having too many visitors, the coronavirus has left Venice deserted. Many here who rely on tourism are eager for people to return, but it's a balancing act between preventing a second wave of coronavirus while reopening the city. I hope the authorities will manage the city in a way that is a compromise between the city we knew then and the one we're experiencing today. Italy became the epicentre of the coronavirus in Europe in late February. The government imposed a crippling shutdown, and the pandemic has so far killed over 30,000 people. areas on the Adriatic coast have taken a huge hit. But travellers will soon be allowed back in time for summer. In 2 months, we've had only 2 overnight stays. This gives you an idea of the situation. We've prepared for reopening according to the regulations in force at the moment, so distancing, face masks, gloves and disinfection gel. Tourism accounts for more than a tenth of Italy's GDP, an industry it's desperate to salvage. Many here are relying on people visiting some of the world's most iconic attractions once again.
And that was Deutsche Welle's Jared Reid with that report. Time for a little bit of your feedback before we go to the news at 6. Hi, it's Yala, who's got in contact saying, OMG, school was so weird. We have to put on hand sanitizer before and after every class and we wash all the desks, but it was so fun to see all my friends again. Thanks for getting in touch, Yella. And Julie from Christchurch says, I got a $9,000 refund last week from Air New Zealand for my return flights to London via LA, scheduled to depart early June. But they charged me a $500 cancellation fee. Should they be charging the cancellation fee when it was the airline cancelling the flights due to COVID-19? Good question, Julie. We'll see if we can get to the bottom of that and let you know.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. School principals say many of their students haven't returned to school today, despite schools fully reopening from this morning. About 800,000 children had been expected to return to class for the first time since the lockdown began in March. Te Aro Primary School Principal Sue Clement has told Checkpoint about 20% of the 240 children on the school roll stayed home today.
There are some children who are immune compromised and are still staying at home, and there are some who have family members who are immune compromised, and so they're just waiting to see what takes place over the next week to 2 weeks. So there are still some children doing distance learning.
Principal Sue Clement. The Principals Federation says attendance rates at some schools today were as low as 30%. Early childhood teachers say the government's extra funding for their services represents a significant investment in the country's children. The government's restored just under $300 million of funding, so childhood centres can now be staffed with 100% of qualified teachers. Mary Colton from the He Whānau Manaaki Kindergarten Association in Wellington has told Checkpoint it's a huge cause for celebration in a field where every learning centre has spent blood, sweat and tears to have only qualified staff.
We must aspire to having 100% of our teacher-led early learning services employing 100% qualified registered teachers. It's the only way that we can really honour our youngest children.
Mandy Colson from the Kindergarten Association. There's currently no community transmission of COVID-19 in New Zealand, but the Director General of Health says people should remain watchful. There have been no new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand in the past 24 hours. This means the country's combined total of confirmed and probable cases is 1,499. Ashley Bloomfield says because of the 14-day incubation period, new cases under level 2 won't emerge until next week. The Prime Minister says the focus is on increasing mass gathering numbers for everyone rather than an interim measure for those attending churches and places of worship. Jacinda Ardern responded to political and public backlash last week by increasing the number of people allowed at tangi or funeral by 10 people to 50. She says the country is on track to increase mass gathering numbers, and Dr Bloomfield will provide the Cabinet with advice on Monday.
What we want to do when it comes to wider church services is actually get ourselves to a place sooner rather than later where we see that number increase.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. A scientist who authored a report for the Ministry of Health on 5G is rubbishing any claims it causes harm. More than a dozen cell phone towers have been hit by suspicious fires so far this year. Martin Gledhill, who's been working in the radiation field for 30 years, says there's no evidence of any harm to humans. He says there's nothing special about 5G and it's similar to 4G and even radio and TV waves.
There's nothing to suggest that the way you encode the information onto the radio signal, so for example how you actually transmit your TV program or how you transmit your data or your voice on a cell phone signal, makes any difference to the way it interacts with the body.
Martin Gledhill. More than 100 nations, including New Zealand, have now backed a push for an international inquiry into the coronavirus outbreak. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't believe there is any blame to be laid, but the international community is right to be asking questions. The ABC's Stephen Judgett reports.
116 countries have now agreed to co-sponsor a European Union motion at the World Health Assembly, which calls for an impartial, independent and comprehensive evaluation of the international health response to COVID-19. That coalition now also includes a large group of African nations. But the motion doesn't specifically mention China, and the US has been pushing for it to include tougher language.
Stephen Judgett's reporting. In news just to hand, a man has been charged in relation to a fatal crash that killed an officer in February. Constable Naomi McRae, 35, was off duty at the time of the crash on Linwood Road, Karaka, on February 13th. A 61-year-old man faces 2 charges: careless driving causing death and careless driving causing injury. He's due to appear in the Papakura District Court on the 28th of May. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Warriors CEO Cameron George has questioned the integrity of the NRL competition after his club's request for a lone player to resolve their prop crisis was declined. Injuries sustained during training this week have left the Rugby League club short of middle forwards and with no way to bolster the squad other than getting a lone player from another club. George says the NRL should allow a lone player rather than force a club to use a development player to maintain the standard of the competition, which starts again next week. Former All Black Aaron Cruden says the injuries that have begun striking the NRL are a lesson to Super Rugby players when they return to contact training. Cruden was among more than 100 Super Rugby players to rejoin teammates today as the 5 New Zealand franchises begin preparations for the revamped Super Rugby Aotearoa competition next month. Rugby League's NRL competition kicks off next week, but several players have already suffered serious injuries soon after resuming contact sessions. Cruden says his fitness trainers have emphasised getting back into things slowly.
Trainers laid out the fact that they didn't want any heroes coming out in the gym this morning. So what they meant by that is guys just listening to their body and understanding where they're at right now. And just trusting the fact that over the next couple of weeks they'll be able to either put a little bit more mass back on or strength. But everyone looked pretty good and was eager to rip in.
That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, big questions over the future of New Zealand's biggest public-private partnership project, Transmission Gully. How our DNA, digital connections and geography can help us get through the COVID pandemic. US true crime writer Bob Kolker on the shadowy history of the science of schizophrenia. And media commentator Andrew Holden with the ongoing fallout from the NZME and Stuff merger battle. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy with hail. Possible thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening. Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Canterbury. Cloud with a few showers spreading north tonight, becoming fine in the south tomorrow morning and further north tomorrow afternoon. For the remaining regions of the North and South Island, mainly fine apart from areas of low cloud or fog morning and night, and the chance of a shower for eastern Northland and Great Barrier Island. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and occasional showers, mainly tomorrow morning when some could be heavy. You're listening to RNZ National. It's 7.5 minutes past 6.
School returned for the first time in 8 weeks. That story coming up. But in the last few minutes, in the first political poll since we went into lockdown, National has plummeted 12 points to just 30.6, with Labour up 14 points to 56.5%. A new Newshub poll has revealed Labour's handling of the COVID situation has given them a massive boost in the polls. And joining us now is political commentator Matthew Hooton. Matthew, crisis tends to favour a government, so is anything in there a surprise to you?
I would have expected a big swing to the government and harm to the opposition, but this is absolutely massive. It suggests National is on its way to lose about 12 seats. That's 12 MPs who will lose their jobs. The gap between National and Labour is 26 points. Now, just to put that in context, and you think of a great
political landslide, say Ronald Reagan over Walter Mondale, that was only an 18% gap. A 25% gap is absolutely enormous, and there is no way back for National on this unless it makes some radical changes.
So when you say radical changes, do you mean leadership?
Well, clearly the leadership has failed. Simon Bridges is down to 4.5%, down 6 points. The public simply does not like him. That isn't fair. The public simply did not like Andrew Little. And he's a perfectly pleasant person, Andrew Little, but the public did not like him. And so Labor had no choice in the end but to get rid of him. And National is now at that point.
Would anyone have thrived in that environment, though, given the situation, the scenario that Simon Bridges was facing? Would someone else in the job of leading National have done any better?
It's difficult to think they could have done worse. The Labor government, the coalition government, have made many mistakes through this period, including, despite what they claim, they were slow to move to lockdown. It's simply not true that they moved quickly. The National Party and others were urging much faster action. So there was plenty of areas to criticise the government's handling of this. But when Simon Bridges criticises the government, it falls on deaf ears. It just doesn't connect with people. And essentially you have somebody in the leadership, like Andrew Little, who simply cannot communicate, cannot connect with the public.
Is there the stomach to roll him, and who would be the replacement?
Well, the National Party is the Conservative Party. Conservative people join it. Conservative people become MPs, but I don't think any of them were expecting a poll quite this bad. They're expecting more like 35%. So whether they have the stomach is up to them, but at the moment 12 of them are going to lose their jobs, and that's going to focus their minds quite a bit. The obvious candidate, obviously, is Judith Collins. She is there in the preferred Prime Minister rankings. Not that high, but still, she is there. She's got a well-recognised name. She has a well-recognised style of politics. She stood for leader of the National Party before. She desperately wants the job. And to a certain extent, she's almost entitled to it. And certainly that is her view, that she's been treated badly over the years by the National Party hierarchy, that only she has the capability to take on Jacinda Ardern. And there's a very strong case, that she's been making behind the scenes for a very long time, that she should be given an opportunity to see if she can do for National what Jacinda Ardern did for Labor.
What about Todd Muller? Because that is a name that is thrown around and has been recently, but I'm sure a lot of people listening, when you mention the name, will go, who?
Yeah, Todd Muller has more than 30 years in the National Party. He was a staffer for Jim Bolger after he finished being, I think, president of the Waikato Student Union, the first National Party person ever to be head of the Waikato Student Union way back in the late 80s. And since then, he's had a career in business at Fonterra and at Zespri. He's extremely well known in provincial New Zealand, but probably not so much in urban New Zealand. And he would be seen as the other candidate against Judith Collins if she decides to take advantage of this poll and act.
We're out of time, but very quickly, how much time do you give Simon Bridges in the leader's role for National?
I think if National acts rationally, they will wait to see what happens in the poll that comes out on Thursday on the other TV network. It's expected to come out on Thursday. They don't have a caucus meeting this week. They're not all gathered in Wellington tomorrow, so they don't have to make a decision urgently. But if that poll is also terrible on Thursday night, then I would suspect that Bridges will come under huge pressure to resign as leader on Tuesday week, tomorrow week, in 8 days' time when they meet as a caucus.
Thank you for your time this evening. That is Matthew Hooton, political commentator there, talking about the new Reid Research News Hub poll, which has Labour at 56.5% and National down to just 30%. Hundreds of thousands of children return to school and early learning today, squirting litres of hand sanitiser and putting carefully developed hygiene plans to the test. After 8 weeks out of the classroom, students and teachers admitted to excitement and a bit of nerves. And not all came back. The Principals Federation says at some schools, as many as 2/3 of children stayed away. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
In Wellington, the principal of Karori West Normal School, Janice Schramka, was out on the street this morning welcoming children back to school for the first time in 8 weeks.
Hi boys. Hello. Hello. You know what to do, don't you, my friends? Yeah, put your scooters away and go into class. Cool. Welcome back. Yep.
Inside, new entrant children were learning a whole new set of rules.
Good job. And we'll just put some hand sanitizer on before you sit on the mat, okay? Good girl, rub it in. It's real wet, so give it a good rub. Nice work. The back of your hands as well. Wonderful. You can go sit down on the mat now.
Nearby, a class of Year 4 and 5 children were delighted to be back in the classroom with a few caveats.
I'm excited and nervous. I'm nervous just because of all these precautions, but I'm excited to see my friends again.
I want to go home because I got used to staying at home.
I'm annoyed that we have to get up at like a normal time for getting up this morning and I can't sleep in.
It's not just school children who were back in class today. Thousands of under-5s returned to early childhood centres too. At Newtown Kindergarten, Marty Renton was very happy to be reunited with some of her favourite outfits.
I really did miss the dress-ups because I loved them.
One of the kindergarten's teachers, Catherine Vaughan, says everyone's adjusted well.
It's been really fun seeing all the families and the children, and most of them are really happy running in, happy to come and see their friends, happy to see us. Parents seem really happy, really confident to drop their children off.
At Wellington High School, the principal, Dominic Killalea, has a metre-long ruler on his desk to help with physical distancing measurements. He says the focus this week is getting everyone used to the new rules.
We're going above what actually is required, but we're really keen for kids to get in that routine so that our students will be hand sanitising when they come into class and they'll be cleaning desks at the end of that class. So just stopping about 5 minutes before the end of the class and getting into that pattern of doing that and looking after each other and realising that everyone's looking after each other.
These teenagers said they were excited to be back in the classroom.
Definitely in the weekend I was a little bit nervous about coming back to school, but I woke up this morning and I was so excited. I was like playing music in my room, getting ready.
It seems like quarantine sort of just happened like ages ago, like this Thursday. It seems like ages has passed.
It's a bit funny because you don't know where people are at and how people feel, so some people just want to give you a big hug and some people are a bit hesitant.
The school's head of science, Nicola Dow, says it's been great for teachers too, though she admits to a few nerves.
Because I'm part of the pandemic planning at school, so most of my emotions, I was very anxious about, did we get everything right? Have we got hand sanitizer in all the rooms? Did we get the disinfectant right? Have we got the posters up? Is everybody going to follow the rules? Nobody is listening to the rules. So, that kind of like real mix of emotions.
Though most of Wellington High's students were back at school today, the Principals Federation, which represents primary and intermediate schools, says some of its members are reporting turnouts as low as 37 or even 30%. However, it says schools with low turnouts had been told that many of the absent children would be coming back to school next week. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
And it wasn't just teachers and students feeling the first day nerves. Parents of some of the children returning today felt a little anxious about jumping back into the school routine. Ananzaki reports.
The unmistakable sound of the school bell, coupled with the chatter on the playgrounds, another sign of a country slowly on the path to normality. At Christchurch East School this morning, Jay Kumar was uneasy about sending his 6-year-old daughter back to the classroom.
We had a bit of break, but I'm still not 100% sure if I should bring my daughter to school because the virus is still here. There's no vaccine or anything.
But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern assured parents that it is safe to send their kids back.
We wouldn't be having them going back unless we believed it to be safe.
and we've been working really hard, Ministry of Education, with schools to make sure that they've got everything they need and all the information they need for a safe return for everyone.
In Auckland's Mount Albert, hundreds of teenagers filled the footpaths again as they made their way to school. Marist College was at the centre of the country's second largest cluster of COVID-19, with 96 cases linked to it. Over the last fortnight, staff, students and their families have been offered free COVID-19 testing and more than 900 tests have been completed. One parent, Michelle, says it was reassuring her family was able to get tested.
Because as a parent, you also need to look after your kids and check about those symptoms.
Marist College has been working with public health authorities to make sure it has exceeded all the distancing and hygiene requirements it needs to before reopening today. Michelle says after 7 weeks at home, her 2 daughters were looking forward to getting back to school.
Very excited. They woke up very early. Last night they prepared their things. Even their lunch box, they already prepared it.
And fears hundreds of students would be left stranded because of the cap on the numbers allowed on public transport due to physical distancing rules have not eventuated. The principal of Auckland's Maclean's College, Stephen Hargraves, says he sent out minivans this morning to pick up students he expected would be left in the lurch.
We only had 2 that we needed to pick up in the school van, and what we noticed was a huge number of parents driving their children to school and dropping them off in the streets around the school.
Mr Hargraves says students are also up to speed on hygiene rules.
The students seem pretty well aware of it. They were spreading themselves along the footpath while they were waiting for the pedestrian crossing to go green for them. So no, they're onto it, and they've come back in big numbers too.
Stephen Hargraves says despite the long time between classes, students are happy to be back and teachers are happy to see their classes filled and hopes for business as usual over the coming weeks. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Anand Zaki.
It is 21 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There were no new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand today and there's no community transmission. At today's official briefing, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said the last time they couldn't link a case to a known contact was the 2nd of April. But far from popping the champagne corks, Dr Bloomfield is reminding people to stay vigilant, be watchful and get tested, saying the country cannot afford to be complacent. That's because with a 2-week incubation period, there may yet be new cases.
Now over really 2.5, nearly 3 weeks post we started Alert Level 3, we haven't seen any spike in cases. We haven't found cases that were unexpected. But obviously we want to remain watchful. We want to keep up that testing across the country to make sure that if there are any cases there that may have gone undetected to date, we're finding them. And we're more likely to find them or see a spike because people are interacting more. So hence continuing the wide testing and being ready to act very quickly.
And while the numbers are looking good, when asked what was required to move to level 1, he urged people to be patient.
At the moment, we're in a position where there is no community transmission. What we want to see is that is still the case once we settle into the full Alert Level 2 arrangements with, as has been signalled previously, with that size of that top end size of gatherings being at 100 people. And we would want to be sure that we were still seeing no community transmission. That is, that we're not seeing cases that we cannot link back to international travel or to other existing cases that we already know about.
That's why on Monday the Cabinet will consider whether to increase the number of people allowed at both private and public gatherings. Currently, gatherings are limited to 10 people, although funerals and tangihanga are allowed 50 people if strict health measures are in place. Again, Dr Bloomfield urged patience.
My sense is that New Zealanders want to make sure we capture the gains that we made through Alert Levels 4 and 3. And we're not talking about months until we're reconsidering the numbers. It's been considered again in a week's time. And I think people understand why we need to continue to take a cautious approach and make sure that even as we get into alert level 2, particularly 2 weeks in, so that 14-day period, we're still confident there are not these pockets of infection out there that are not undetected, and especially with more people gathering and interacting through different environments, work, retail, other organisations, and of course in the school environment.
The Police Commissioner, who also attended today's briefing, was asked about the extra powers police have been given during COVID-19, including the ability to search people's houses without a warrant if they believe the COVID-19 epidemic rules aren't being followed. Andrew Costa defended the new law, saying police needed the powers to take action against things like out-of-control parties.
Powers do exist for other things like serious offending, drug offending, and also noise control, as I've noted, but we can't generally enter a property if the occupants have denied entry, so the powers allow us to sort out the outlier events.
Mr Costa says the number of reports to police on possible breaches under Alert Level 2 had significantly dropped from Level 3. Under Alert Level 3, police received between 700 and 1,000 reports a day of possible breaches, whereas under Level 2, that has dropped to between 200 and 250 a day. Super Rugby is back, but it's nothing like before, and it's taking players some getting used to. The Chiefs, the Hurricanes, the Blues, the Crusaders and Highlanders were back at training today, preparing for the 10-week Super Rugby Aotearoa, which will kick off in a month's time and feature only the local franchises. Nick Trubridge reports.
Former All Black Aaron Cruden was back into it with the Chiefs today, but says things are very different.
This morning we arrived in at HQ and we all had to sign in. We all had our temperatures taken, and I suppose we had a group meeting first thing off the bat. And again, it was just a lot of procedures, a lot of protocols that I guess Chiefs management expressed to the players, and that's come via obviously the government and New Zealand Rugby. So for us, it's an interesting one because there's no manual book for it. So everyone's just obviously trying to put the best parameters and protocols in place, and it's up to us as players and everyone involved to, I guess, take that responsibility and make sure we handle it as best we can. Obviously, a big one's been just around personal hygiene, making sure that you're always cleaning surfaces, washing your hands, doing everything that we can individually and collectively as a team now that we're back together to make sure that we stay together and hopefully we can see this season out, all things going well.
Cruden admits there was some nervousness among players when the fitness trainers got the tape measure and scales out to see what shape they're in after 2 months of lockdown.
There was fat testing straight away this morning, so as soon as the calipers that measure the fat testing, they were pulled out, all the boys sort of, okay, attention. But most of the boys looked pretty good. And looking at some of the big boys, no offence, I don't think that it doesn't look like they've gotten any smaller. But it was quite good. Obviously, the trainers laid out the fact that they didn't want any heroes coming out in the gym this morning. So what they meant by that is guys just listening to their body and understanding where they're at right now. And just trusting the fact that over the next couple of weeks they'll be able to either put a little bit more mass back on or strength, which was great. But I must say I was pleasantly surprised in a way maybe that everyone looked pretty good and was eager to rip in.
The first five says he did work on picking up some new skills, although it didn't go as well as he had hoped.
I did try to learn the guitar. I think I got through about 5 or 6 lessons on YouTube, but I tell you what, my fingers were extremely soft. They were giving me agonies, but maybe I need to go to a ukulele, just the baby version to start with, and then build to a guitar.
Hurricanes coach Jason Holland says his players are excited to be back at training, but it'll be a challenge to get them prepared after a long and disrupted season.
I suppose the best way to describe it is when my kids were small and in pissing rain for a couple of days and there's a bit of sun and they can finally get out and they go mad. So the boys are in great form when they came in. The banter was flowing. So I think everyone's just, relieved and pretty grateful that we get the opportunity to come back in and do what we love.
The Hurricanes are preparing to face the Blues, who have managed to lure All Black playmaker Bowden Barrett north. Barrett has set tongues wagging by setting a personal best in a fitness test known as the Bronco, which involves different sprints at 20, 40 and 60 metres repeated 5 times. Jason Holland says he is focusing more on getting the team ready for rugby and enjoying the challenge.
But it's been fun. It's been fun to have challenges put in front of you and try to figure out what's the best way to get the players in the best nick. You've got to play the Blues in 4 weeks' time. So you sort of got to have an attitude, don't you, like the rest of the country at the moment, that whatever's thrown at you, you just got to find a way. And that's the sort of way that we're approaching life and footy at the moment.
Super Rugby Aotearoa kicks off on June 13th. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
The Queensland Premier has today poured cold water on any prospect of a midwinter getaway to the Sunshine Coast. Talks are ongoing about a Trans-Tasman bubble, but the timeline for that looks increasingly hazy. Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says she doesn't envisage lifting border restrictions in her state until September. She told the ABC she's concerned about cases creeping in from southern states.
What we know is that there is still community transmission in Victoria and in New South Wales. So as soon as my Chief Health Officer says that I can relax those restrictions, we absolutely will. We want to welcome as many people to the Sunshine State as possible, where it's beautiful one day and perfect the next. But of course, we just can't do that at the moment. We'll review that at the end of each month, and we do know that there's school holidays approaching as well. So we know people want certainty. They want to come to Queensland. It's a safe place to be, and of course, our tourism operators are absolutely looking forward to welcoming people back. They have been probably one of the hardest hit sectors. 1 in 10 jobs in Queensland is in the tourism sector.
And that's Anastasia Palaszczuk. Now, before we go, so many of you getting in touch about Air New Zealand. Ray says, Air New Zealand is a crock. I have 3 cancelled return flights, so 6 actual flights, sitting somewhere in credit, but I've got no record. They've disappeared from my app, and the dollar credit hasn't replaced this, nor does it appear anywhere. If I want to book new flights, I have to pay new money. We will keep asking Air New Zealand for an interview. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Labour would be able to easily govern alone based on a News Hub Read Research poll tonight. School principals say just under 80% of students returned to the classroom this morning for their first day back in 6 weeks. More than 100 nations, including New Zealand, have now backed to push for an international inquiry into the coronavirus outbreak. And early childhood teachers are describing the government's extra funding for their services as a significant investment in the country's children. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7, and then Brian Crump along with Nights.
Tonight on Nights, we are talking sport with Shannon Byrne from the ABC. Hell, there might even be some sport to talk about. There's a window on the world of a Georgian artist who's building a kinetic sculpture for the Chinese city of Wuxi. Nick Bollinger samples the latest from Andrew Fagan. And tales from the Wellington Zoo. Well, primates actually, some of which may have